And welcome. It is time for Mr. Constitution Hour. No, Constitution Radio. Mr. Constitution Hour is on Thursdays.
Yes, you got it.
Distracted. Welcome to the program. I am Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution. This is Constitution Radio. We're going to get back to some of the basics, some of the fundamentals today. I did have Dennis a moment ago on with me, and then he vanished. Haven't seen Alan yet, so we'll see what happens. Maybe there's issues. I don't know. It happens. Welcome to the program. I taught, I shouldn't say taught. What's the word? Coached. I coached Little League for a few years. And the first year, it was, I think, minor A, minor B, one of the two. I can't remember which. It was the beginners, right? The lowest level after T-ball. And fortunately for me, I had a guy who had spent a lot of time playing baseball as my assistant coach, and he should have been coach. He was definitely better manager, I guess would be the right term. He was definitely better at what was going on than I was. But he didn't want to deal with the parents. He didn't want the responsibility. He said, no, I'll coach. I'll take the lead on everything you want. You're a manager. And because we had a great group of kids, great group of parents, and he was so good at teaching fundamentals, it made my job a lot easier. Now, I know some of the basic fundamentals of baseball and taught what I knew to teach. When I played, I was a catcher, shortstop, and second baseman, primarily second baseman. And so, I catch, throw, whatever. I hitting. I had all those basics down. But it was nice to have someone who really knew the fundamentals. Then when we got to the next level of Little League, kids should know the basics, but they're still learning their fundamentals. And same dad, same kid, came up with me to that next level, made it easy. Then the year after that, my son, who was in Little League at the time, got good enough that they believed he was old enough that he should go to the majors, which in Little League is, now these are the kids where the competition really begins. You stop with the everybody gets to play attitude. Now, you earn your spot, things like that. And I didn't have any support from other parents, other coaches. I pretty much was on my own. And I made a false assumption. I believed since all these kids had been in minor A, minor B, some of them all going all the way back to T-ball, they had the fundamentals down. I didn't have to teach fundamentals anymore. All I had to do is put together a good ball club and coach them, on, at that level and let them perform. Little did I know I had 2 or 3 players on the team that really had the fundamentals down. And so entering the season, we were lousy. It was bad. About 3-4 games in, we got to go back to the fundamentals. We got to go back to the basics. It's time to learn the things we should have learned along the way. Since you didn't, we'll do it now. Let's get back to the fundamentals. Once we got back to the fundamentals, it made for a better team. Once we quit trying to operate on bad habits and not knowing as much as we should about the basics of the game, we became a better team. We didn't win any divisions. We didn't even come in second place. We were battling with another team between third and fourth place in our division, but at least we made it a fight there at the end. We had to go back to fundamentals. So last week, my wife and I celebrated our 42nd wedding anniversary. We went up the coast. Her idea was to go horseback riding. It's been 30 years since I've been on a horse, and really 40 years since I spent any significant time on a horse. And I got on that horse with a little bit of cockiness, not a lot, but a little bit, because I figured, I know what I'm doing, and I didn't. I had to go back to the fundamentals. I had to go back to the fundamentals, get my hand turned correctly with the reins, all kinds of stuff. I'm left-handed, so I'm holding the reins with my left hand, unlike everybody else. Back to the fundamentals. Then on the way back, hit a golf course. I love to golf. My wife's learning golf, so the bigger golf courses, she doesn't play yet, but she'll ride along and encourage me and try to learn. And the golf course we decided to visit, that I decided to play, to put it nicely, had some daunting fairways. It was a 9-hole, but 7 of those 9 were in excess of 400 yards, except for I think one of them. It's like mid to upper 300 yards. And these are fours, par 4s and 2 par 5s. The par 3s were 170 yards, 180 yards. So they're long par 3s for a guy like me, for a duffer. And so I decided in order to be able to play this course, I needed to put a little extra oomph on the ball. And I was all over the place. I was to the right, I was to the left, I was to the right. So I was everywhere but straight. Topping the ball, it was, will you quit laughing? My wife's over here laughing. It was ugly. Then about halfway in, a little bit past halfway, about 7th, so 7th, 8th, and 9th, about the 7th fairway. What are you doing, Doug? Back to the fundamentals. 70% of your swing, keep your head down, don't try to kill it. Go back to what you've learned about your even swing. Be careful that you're not going out and in. Don't turn your hands, etc., etc. Back to the fundamentals. My last 3 drives were beautiful. Long enough. Straight. And once those fundamentals were down and I got back to my fundamentals and my irons, I almost had a couple of pars. I always get at least 1 par per time I play. It was disgusting that I didn't this time. But I didn't even pull myself out of the basement until I went back to the fundamentals. The fundamentals are important across the board, be it baseball, horseback riding, or golf, or anything else in life. You got to go back to the fundamentals. Hello there, Dobie Dave. Dobie Dave has given us a greetings from the chat room at Rumble. Rumble.com/Douglas V. Gibbs. You can also go to YouTube.com/Douglas V. Gibbs. Live, 1 o'clock Pacific time on Saturdays. Constitution Radio is on both of those. I encourage you to put some chats in there. And if there's more than a couple of you, have a nice discussion. Get the chat busy. It's good for the algorithms of the show. We want to spread the word. Of course, you can spread the word also by telling others about the show and sharing the links. Now, back to my point. So, getting back to the fundamentals, because that's what it's all about, right? The fundamentals. And now it's our country. And like that third baseball team I was manager of, the one in the majors, not doing real well, struggling. We need to get back to the fundamentals. Like that golf game. All over the place. Get back to the fundamentals. We have fundamentals when it comes to our country. And one of them is in the Declaration of Independence. Consent to the governed. Does not mean that we're democracy. We the people does not mean democracy. Consent to the governed does not mean democracy. And self-government does not mean that either. What it means is that we're supposed to be involved. And being involved in our republic takes many forms. Our First Amendment enumerates rights that surround those forms. Getting back to the basics is getting back to being a virtuous people. That's the reason why freedom of religion is there. Getting back to the basics is saying what we need to say and doing freely and being involved as we say it. hence freedom of speech, and writing about it and reporting about it, and a press that is not hindered by government interference, freedom of the press. And that we assemble together, we gather together peacefully to discuss the matters of the day, to come up with our ways of dealing with it, fixing it, administering it, staving off government when it starts leaning in a tyrannical direction. And then there's one that we seem to have forgotten, the fifth right enumerated in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition the government for redress grievances. It's a concept deeply rooted in English constitutional tradition and American foundations. The petition clause found in the First Amendment reads, that Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition the government. It's not an abstract right to be heard, but a concrete procedural mechanism for popular influence over the legislature, for us to be involved. Once again, we're not talking democracy. We're talking involvement. Declaration of Independence states, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The United States was not established to be a democracy. Democracy was far from the minds of these guys. So, I mean, they knew what it was. Democracies had proven to be dangerous. They always devolve into oligarchies. The founding fathers understood that consolidating power into any single place is dangerous. And that includes in the power in the hands of the people. But at the same time, the voice of the people is the most important safeguard of a stable system of liberty. How do you create a government that derives its powers from the consent of the governed without allowing it to devolve into pure democracy? How does the voice of the people be involved without it being through direct vote? Democracy can only be present in a system in limited form without becoming destructive. Federal government, as originally designed, possessed only one office that was democratically elected, members of the United States House of Representatives. Senate office holders were originally appointed by the state legislatures. The president was originally chosen by electors, with no nationwide popular vote as we have today. Judges are appointed, as are other officers of the federal government. The people's democratic voice was intended to be present only in the House of Representatives. Then how, one might ask, does a government derive its powers from the consent of the governed? How do we make that happen? The American system, in a sense, is a Frankenstein's monster. It was formed not as an aristocracy or a democracy or a monarchy or a theocracy or any other pure form of government one might see elsewhere in the world or throughout history. It is a republic, meaning it is grounded in the rule of law. It takes from each of those systems only their better qualities. A pseudo-aristocracy was established by giving the states a voice in the Senate. Democracy was satisfied by providing the House of Representatives to the people, whose members are democratically elected. Theocracy was avoided through the Establishment Clause, yet the Founding Fathers recognized the importance of faith's influence on government. Therefore, in the First Amendment, they also ensured that government could not pass laws prohibiting the free exercise of religion. The concept of religious freedom through the free exercise clause helps maintain a Christian foundation. while the Establishment Clause prevents government from becoming a pure theocracy. And the advantages of monarchy were included in two ways. A president, not a king, who possesses certain external authorities like commander-in-chief and foreign affairs, yet is limited by law. His job is not to rule, but to execute the laws. And a government that has the power to govern rather than rule, but can be reined in by the Republican attributes already mentioned and through petition. Petition is the key component drawn from the long history of British monarchy, while also satisfying the key component that Jefferson wrote about in the Declaration of Independence, the consent to the governed. We, the people of the United States, the first words of the preamble are embodied in the God-given natural right of petitioning the government for redress of grievances. The right to petition possessed a direct inheritance from English practice. The right to petition the monarch and parliament was a long-established and often perilous tradition in England. It was considered a fundamental liberty, distinct from the privilege to vote. The English Bill of Rights of 1689 explicitly affirmed the right of the subjects to petition the king. It is one of the fundamentals. It is how we get back to the fundamentals. Like in baseball, getting back to petitioning government for redress grievances is learning how to properly throw the ball and swing the bat, to do the things that we're supposed to do based on the fundamental skills provided and the tools provided. All right. I see you were able to get back here, Dennis, and join us again. Welcome back, sir.
Yeah, it kicked me off. I don't know why.
Well, you're back. Hopefully you heard what I had to say. You probably read it already anyway. You've heard me talk about this before. I spent a lot of time in the beginning talking about the importance of getting back to fundamentals. I used examples of baseball and horseback riding and golf to kind of illustrate what I meant. And I'm a firm believer that petitioning the government for redress grievances is a part of going back to our fundamentals here in this country. What's your thoughts?
Well, that's always the kind of challenging point is, in California, we have petitions all the time. They call them initiatives, and then they'll get them and put them on the ballot, and the people will vote for them. It might be something the people want, but the legislature just won't do, so they're kind of going around the legislature. In other cases, you've got, going back to our earlier years where they didn't have all the forms of government, but, they would put together petitions. I mean, going all the way back, to the Mayflower and the Pilgrims, they wrote a charter up before they left the boat, before their feet hit the dry land, they wanted to have a government. The Mayflower and the Pilgrims, they wrote a charter up before they left. Well, I got an echo here, I guess I'm playing with.
Sorry about that.
Are you hearing me all right?
Yeah, I hear you okay. I had a problem with my own system. That was my fault. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, so now, we're in the high-tech media world, cell phones, instant communication, news at your fingertips. Everybody can be as informed as they want to be on whatever items, that they're interested in. The challenge now is sorting through all of the news media, to really determine, what is the truth, and that's been a challenge throughout all of history. You got people that are in power that play word games that say one thing and mean another. They're insincere, they're wolves in sheep's clothing, or vice versa. And so for the people to mobilize in such a fashion to truly give consent, other than showing up on election day and hoping that the election isn't stolen. That's it's an interesting thing. I mean, you've always made it a practice of, talking to your local city government guys and, the state government people and, getting to know your rep, and that way you can bend their ear. So your voice is kind of being heard. But, the average guy on the street, I haven't talked to one of my reps in probably 40 years. I've signed petitions. I've, walked in neighborhoods, run for office. I mean, I've done things, but when Jefferson and the guys wrote what they wrote, and the states took their sovereignty and gave specific areas of sovereignty to the federal government, and they wanted to create a lion strong enough to do what lions do, but at the same time chain him down with the Constitution so that he doesn't go crazy, fighting human nature, which generally when you get a little bit of authority, you start to abuse it. And then you try to get more and more, kind of like Washington's farewell address, talking about, partisan, political parties, factions, and dishonest men. It's hard to listen to what people say and know truly what they really mean. When the media tries to blur it. So, Franklin's comment, you got a republic if you can keep it. I don't know if it was easier back then, or supposedly it ought to be easier now. But either way, the challenge is still daunting. You got to get enough people ticked off to where they want to redress their grievances instead of just kind of suffering, silently. We all seem to put up with a lot of stuff because we don't want to have to go to bat to go through the hassle of fixing it. We're not paid to do that. It's outside our normal job description. It takes effort to do that and to get groups together and do email campaigns and phone calls campaigns. And, it's all a bunch of volunteers doing stuff. So, it's it is challenging, but it gives you the best form of government around, because all the other ones that you mentioned, theocracies, theocracy, monarchy, and all of that, those are, self-loaded, fully autonomous. We got all the power. We're going to make all the decisions, and it's hard to combat that. If you're just a serf out there, toiling around on the land, and you're working for the noble, but even he has to kowtow to the king. So we have a very challenging, but yet a very diverse and probably the most perfect type of government that we can have, other than what human frailties put into it.
And, it was designed, and we were talking about this, my wife and I, yesterday on on Friday Live, and, that there was a balance they were seeking, because they knew if you have too much one thing, it won't work. You have too much another thing. Like Salone, said that without laws, there is no liberty. But if you have too many laws, there is no liberty. You got to find that happy medium. That's what the founders essentially worked on. And that's getting back to these fundamentals, their fundamentals. And they knew democracy was dangerous, so they didn't want a democracy, but they knew that we needed some democracy. So there was democracy in the House of Representatives. Democracy, for those of you listening or watching, what it basically does, it enables the population centers to control things. And so you only want them to have a voice in a part, and then you want the rural areas. And this idea today that we've been told that, a republic and a democracy is the same thing is nothing new. James Madison 5 times in his Federalist Papers explained the difference between a republic and a democracy. Why did he feel the need to do that? Because there were arguments saying they were one and the same. The foundation, the fundamentals of this country is that of a constitutional republic. And then people say, oh, we're a republic. Well, then, this is a republic, that's a republic, so we're just a republic like them. No, we are a unique republic. We're like no other republic that's ever existed. You can't say we're exactly like the Roman Republic was, or exactly as the Slovenian Republic or the Republic of China. The word republic has been misused. The word republic has been used for republics before, but not in the way that it has been for our republic. And, we can get into that later in more detail, but right now I just want to get back into, the fundamentals, the basics, getting back to the basic foundation. The basic
So I
foundation
think one of the telling points in all this is you were kind of going through Rome and all the rest. And you got, the People's Republic, which, it's a dictatorship, but, they're stealing the word to give it a sense that is something other than what it truly is. But, when the founders made this republic, I think it's interesting that, citizens, actually became an entity again. You were either a serf or a landlord, or you were
a subject or you were not a subject. You were a ruler.
Yeah.
Ruling class.
So,
oh, absolutely. And,
so,
and when you have a ruling class of subjects, well, subjects serve the government.
Yeah, and so we had the first citizens in nearly 2,000 years. Going all the way back to the days of Greece and Sparta and Rome and all of that.
Right.
And it was a big deal. Paul, got all the way to Rome because he was a citizen. If it weren't for that, they probably would have killed him a lot earlier than what they did. But and now we water down, and you've written a lot about this. That whether it be birthright citizenship, which doesn't exist, but people claim it does. That all you got to do is be born here, and now you're natural born. They take citizenship and they shove everything into one big melting pot, and they call it all the same when it's not. But it's just kind of a gooey word. It's like taking a salad and throwing it in a blender, and just eating one thing. I mean, you lose your individuality because it's all blended together, and that's what the governing principles that the founders put together. That's what has been going on here.
And the natural rights, and natural rights are part of that, because if you're a subject, they're determining your rights. They're determining what access you have and defining your rights, and whether or not you even get, to enjoy any of them. But if you're a citizen, those rights belong to you. They're not a government's business. You're not there to serve the government. The government's there to serve you. And a part of serving you is to keep their hands off your rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good points for sure. Alan.
I want to bring up Jim Otis, but I won't. I'll let Alan do it.
No. James Otis, you said? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Alan might have a few things to say about James Otis, maybe. Perhaps.
Maybe.
Yeah. So what do you got for us, Alan?
Oh, I might go at this a little bit different.
Well, I expect that, because you're like talking to a brick wall.
I'm nice.
That was a joke, folks.
I'm actually nicer than most brick walls. Okay.
Yeah, and I've noticed that as a brick wall, you are quite diverse in the type of bricks you have.
I'm solid, totally solid. Well, let's see. You started off with the baseball thing, and I'm thinking, what?
Where's he going
Why?
with this?
Okay. Are we gonna get into sliding? What? Anyway,
Hey, you know, sliding is a lost art. I look at some of the things the pros do, and I go, man, that guy, he should have been safe, but you know, they don't know how to slide.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but anyway, go ahead.
thank
Yeah,
you.
they got to
Thank
get
you.
back to the fundamentals of sliding.
Oh, the fundamentals. That is such a crazy concept. Fundamentals. Here's the deal. I accept that we need to get back to the fundamentals. But the question that is begged is, what are they?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah, you
Is
can't get
it-
back to them if you don't understand them. And that goes back
It-
to when I was teaching the majors,
Yeah.
that third team. I'm like, okay, these guys know the fundamentals, and they didn't. And I was shocked. I'm shocked how many Americans don't know the fundamentals of this country and our system.
because if you don't know what the fundamentals are, you can't get back to them.
Right.
Now, you were talking about pre-teens who didn't know some of the basics, fundamental basics of
Yeah.
baseball. Okay,
Well,
fine,
and then,
fine.
well, you
Hold
get an
on.
11, 12-year-old by the time you get up to the majors.
Okay.
But yeah, exactly.
However, we have many, many grown adults today who don't know jack about the Constitution, which means they don't understand the fundamentals. They don't think about them. They don't talk about them. It's not in the normal course of discussion.
Well, and they don't just not know about it, they don't care to. You don't start caring to even know these things, it
Well,
seems, based
okay.
on my experience, till you get older. I mean, when I started doing, teaching my Constitution classes, 85% of my students were older than I was.
Well, the problem is that if you don't know the Constitution, then you don't know that you need to know it, because that is not in the common narrative today. You don't know its importance, its source, the background, and it's also something else you don't know. You don't know that the Constitution is not here to protect us. We're here to protect it, which means we have a duty to get involved. Sometimes I do wonder, seriously, was this part of the overall design? Take the US Constitution out of primary education. Don't teach young people about duty. And just let them think that what we really need is a more powerful federal government. Because
Well,
the federal government,
you got to remember when it comes to Constitution,
yeah,
what it means, what it says, what it's defined as, how it's interpreted is all based on judicial and political interpretation. And then you'll get people out there, and I've come across a lot of them, and they say, hey, what you're saying is antiquated. I'm tired of listening to your junk. What do they say today? What it means? That's the truth. And I'm like, no, get back to the basics, get back to the fundamentals.
well, this is part of it. Glad you brought that up. And that is, we have a contract, a compact, whatever you want to call it, written binding, agreed upon agreement. And in that, when you have a contract, you read it, you understand it, and you follow it. There's no interpretation. If you're not sure what a word means, what it meant when they wrote it, then you do some studies, you do some research, you look it up. You go to the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. But you don't broadly interpret the document and its writings to get to what you want. That is not proper reading of a contract. Yet this has become accepted. Gesund. You've got people, oh, well, we broadly interpreted. That means you spun a tale. You didn't read it, understand it, follow it. And you have a lot of people who it's not in their upbringing to care. Just like it wasn't in the training of those young preteens to know how to do the fundamentals. It's not their fault they weren't taught the fundamentals. But what we're all into is about getting the fundamentals out so people understand they have a duty to protect and defend the Constitution. And if you're a patriot, you already know your job description includes get involved. Now, I can understand people saying, yeah, but today's really trying, it's difficult, it's challenging. Just to use one specific time frame, let's go back to the 1700s. Every day was about physical survival, food, water, housing, safety, medical. Every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basis in which they're doing everything from.
Yeah, survival.
And that to me is, I can't imagine that kind of challenge. Yet look at what they did. Now, I kind of know the answer to this, but I'm going to pose it to you, Doug, just to put it in context. Is there, because you did talk about democracy and republic, I would think that if the founders really were into democracy, that word would be in the Constitution. It'd be all over.
Yeah, in the documents, and they would praise it in their writings.
And how many times is the word democracy in the Constitution?
Well, if you read the Constitution, you read the Declaration of Independence, you read the Articles of Confederation, you read the Articles of Association, you read the Northwest Territory, you'll find in all 5 of those documents,
yes,
the democracy appears 0 times.
They didn't want it.
No.
And because they didn't want it because they knew what it was. And if you want, I can pull up some quotes.
Yeah, and history, and these founding fathers, these men were students of history.
Absolutely.
They were students of political theory. They had studied, and remember, they're Englishmen. So they fancied themselves Englishmen before the Revolution. And so British history was their history. And
well, they were British at the time. They were British at the time they were born.
Exactly. Well, it's like during the French and Indian War, they weren't called the British. They that's when the word Americans came up, but they were a part of the British Army. When Paul Revere was writing, and this is a lot of people don't understand, he did not say the British are coming. They were British.
Yeah.
The regulars are coming, is what he said. Not the British, the regulars. They weren't
the
calling themselves necessarily Americans yet.
Which is the redcoats.
Get back to your point here. And what I was going to say is, so British history was their history, and European history was their history. And one of the things that Europe and the British had realized was democracy was very, very destructive. But their way of combating democracy was to go the opposite extreme with monarchy and the divine right of kings and total authoritarian control. That'll protect us against the voice of the people. And the opposite extreme was not the answer either.
Exactly. Just a couple of quotes to give you an idea of what some of the founders were talking about when it comes to democracy. This one is actually from John Adams to John Taylor in 1814.
Okay.
Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. James Madison. Democracies have been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and in general, been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their death. I'm not a fan of this guy, but this is a good quote from John Marshall. Between a balanced republic, note the word balanced republic, and a democracy, The difference is like that between order and chaos.
Balanced republic. And, my wife laughs because I use the word balance so much that sometimes I'll even stop say, what's the next word I'm going to use? Balance. But it's important because it is, balancing between the extremes. When you have the extremes of democracy, pure democracy, when you have the extremes of totalitarianism or authoritarianism, the extremes of religion and theocracy, you have problems. But if you go with the opposite extremes and you don't have any of those influences, you also have problems. That's the reason why the founding fathers, and I mentioned this earlier, when they created the system, they actually did draw from monarchy and aristocracy and theocracy. They drew some of the good things out of those things to form this republic, to form this balance of a system. Then they discarded what they knew was destructive.
This one is from Ambrose Pierce, if you know the name, or Bierce, excuse me. This kind of sums it up. And it's one of the shortest ones. Democracy is 4 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch.
And a republic is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote.
Right. You know the name Oscar Wilde?
Yes.
Democracy means simply the bludgeoning of the people, by the people, for the people.
That's a good one.
It is. And this one is similar. Well, let's see. One last one. Well, I'll leave it at that. To me, they knew they did not want a democracy. That's why it's not in the document. They wanted people to be involved. And the problem is we were not educated to the fundamentals. I guess maybe I'd phrase it this way. If you're a subject, you're just told what to do and you know it, and that's done. If
you're a subject, you serve the government.
Yeah. If you're a serf, you do whatever you're told to do and you belong to the land.
And the land doesn't belong to you.
No, and when the owner sells the land, they sell you at the same time. Mm-hmm. The citizen has rights, but the offset to that great power position is the citizen has duties.
That's a key word, duties.
And the need and the responsibility to give back. This has not been in our fundamental basic education from a young age. Herein lies the problem. This is the problem in part that we need to fix. And you guys mentioned birthright citizenship, the concept, the term natural born citizen. I'm still waiting for someone to say, I thought natural born citizen meant someone who wasn't born C-section. But
I've seen that.
Okay.
It was someone had given me a newspaper clipping of someone who had written a letter to the editor of a newspaper because they're complaining about an article about natural born citizen and how it was and how the article was discriminatory against children born by C-section. Yeah, it's amazing how stupid people can be.
Well, one last.
And then remember, Winston Churchill said, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
Yes. I don't think it takes 5 minutes, but the thing that gets me is that we have this system that was very cleverly designed, and we have allowed ourselves to be taken away from it, to not be involved, to not be educated. And again, done with the complaining. Get down to the learning. And one last thing about the learning, again, if someone had actually read the Constitution. I know you find that far-fetched, Doug. But if someone actually read the Constitution from a standpoint of trying to learn, oh, that would be me, you would notice something. When they talk about the eligibility requirements, think about it. They actually detailed what it takes to be eligible to be in the House, the Senate, and President in the original Constitution.
Right.
You will see in the eligibility requirements of the House, the person has to be a citizen. For the Senate, you have to be a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But for the president, the eligibility requirements talk about age, talk about time and country, but it begins very, very powerfully. No person except a natural born citizen.
And the fascinating part about that was that the inclusion of that language into the Constitution met no debate. There was no, I mean, if you go through Madison's notes, just about everything that was brought up, everything that was talked about was debated heavily.
Right.
There'll be disagreement, there'd be this and that, looking for compromise. That language, there wasn't a single word against it. And then John Jay, who I'm not even always a big fan of, but he got it right here. He wrote a letter to them saying, whoa, definitely make sure natural born citizens in there. Glad you guys discussed it. Glad it's there. You know, this was not something that was under consideration. It was, everybody went, put it in there.
And the thing is that, you know, take note. It said citizen for the eligibility for the House. It said citizen for the eligibility for the Senate. But for the president, it began with no person except a natural born citizen. Then there's the or a citizen at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. For number one, that is differentiating right there between natural born citizen and citizen. And they had to put that in there because if you know what a natural born citizen is, you knew that no one at that moment in time, the time of the writing of the Constitution, adoption, putting it into use, no one alive was old enough to be a natural born citizen and be eligible.
Right.
And
yeah, there were natural born citizens, but they were all like 11 years old or younger.
Yeah, but they weren't old enough to be president. That's why they had to put the or. And what I say to people is,
and that's a key, because one of the things it does is in today's, and if you don't mind me kind of hijacking for a second, in today's discussion over birthright citizenship and the people who support this idea of birthright citizenship, being born on American soil, you're automatically a citizen, they lump citizenship and natural born citizen as the same. If you're born American soil, you're a citizen and a natural born citizen because you're naturally born here. They're one and the same. If they were one and the same, then why is it natural born or a citizen?
Right.
Because while it may not have been a country yet, they were born on the soil.
Well, the other thing is that I would say to somebody, is anybody alive today who was alive at the time of the writing of the Constitution? No. Okay, that or goes away, which means you are now left with no person except a natural born citizen. That is such a demanding statement, a telling statement. No person except. That's how special natural born citizen, the definition is. And to add to that, last thing, as you know, after the election where Thomas Jefferson was awarded the win and John Adams got the loss, and they decided going forward, you either run for president or vice president, not run for president.
You're talking about the 12th Amendment.
Yeah. And so now you have somebody who could be running for VP, but the Constitution holds no qualifications.
Well, I didn't say that those qualifications for vice president, because in order to be vice president, you had to be eligible to be president because you ran for president to be vice president.
Right.
You were the second
now
place winner. So they didn't need to put in the Constitution, oh, by the way, if you're vice president, you got to have the same qualifications as the president, because they had already run for president. They had to have the qualifications. Now it's a separate election.
Yeah, now you're running for either president or VP.
Right. So they add at the end of the 12th Amendment, hey, by the way,
it
you're
says
vice president, you got the same qualifications as president. So what is the qualifications? It includes natural born citizen.
Well, it says this is the last sentence at the end of the 12th Amendment.
All right.
But no person, is there any vagueness here? I don't think so. No person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president, which takes you back to that qualifications, shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. So if you're not eligible to be president, you're not eligible to be VP. And it's time we absolutely get back to the fundamentals, but to get back to the fundamentals, we need to know them. And we need to help people gain an interest in acquiring and understanding what the fundamentals are and understand the duty that comes with it. I think the vast majority of problems we have in this country stem from the fact that we are not operating as a republic. We're operating with a federal government that is absolutely beyond its constitutional limits. My last question for you, Doug, and you can pick the founders. I would pick Jefferson. I would pick Madison, Mason, and a few others. And imagine we could go back in time and bring them forward and show them the world today. And after their mind got blown with watching TV and seeing electric lights and everything else, what do you think their response would be to what the federal government is doing? And I'll leave with that.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be favorable. And when we talk about fundamentals and these fundamentals of this country, we're not talking about British fundamentals or fundamentals from other parts of the world or international expectations. We're talking about American principles. Now, granted, our American principles, the foundation, their journey, the root of these principles didn't originate in this country. Remember, we're grabbing things from all throughout history. But the forging of America, this is where these principles for the first time had been incorporated together into a political structure for one country. And the founding fathers, they were, like I said earlier, they were students of political theory. They reached all the way back to Rome and Greece and the Saxons and the Holy Bible, Hebrew, the Hebraic Mosaic law for the most beneficial components for the formation of their government for this new nation, or this new union of states. And they knew that what was going on in Europe with monarchy doesn't work, but they knew the opposite extreme, the Articles of Confederation, didn't work. They knew that they didn't want to create a centralized national government, but they required something stronger than the government that existed under the Articles. Confederation was too loose of a union, allowed the states to retain all powers and complete sovereignty, and basically it had devolved into a country full of battling siblings, quarreling siblings. I mean, and so they understood that the Articles is too weak of a government, but they feared creating too powerful a government. You need something more powerful, but you want to make it too powerful. This is an absolute balancing act. They're seeking a careful balance that had never really been achieved per se in history. There have been times that it gotten close. They needed a government strong enough to survive in a world of empires, but limited enough not to become tyrannical over the states and the people. They needed the new system to handle the functions of a national government externally and be strong in doing that. They needed a president that could deal with other countries in a strong manner and not be worried about, quarreling states and all that. Well, the same token, he had to be limited. If he signed a treaty, it needed to be ratified by the Senate, which is the voice of the states. And the federal government's not there to rule over us. It doesn't make laws it leaves the domestic issues to the states. The federal government does have some domestic responsibilities, and some of them are creating consistent standards in certain ways when it comes to, full faith and credit in Article 4, for example. But for the most part, if it's internal, it belongs to states. If it's external, it belongs to the federal government. And if it's a quarreling between the states, then the federal government will mediate that because somebody's got to be the referee. But the framers of the Constitution, through their research, they understood the pitfalls of having a pure system, a pure democracy, a pure monarchy, a pure democracy, a pure theocracy, a pure aristocracy, or some of the ways public republics were constructed in the past. They understood that the way they had been done throughout history, they had destructive pieces. So what they did is they studied them, they pulled together the benefits, they discarded what they considered to be dangerous to the aim of securing the natural rights of the people. And then after extensive deliberation, and if you've read Madison's notes, you know it was not a walk in the park. These weren't a bunch of founding fathers skipping through the park, all holding hands, singing Kumbaya. It was extensive deliberation. It was some hardcore debate. It resulted in people walking out saying, "I'm done with this."
And what did Benjamin Franklin?
Well, in his case, yeah, about 6 weeks in, 4 or 5 weeks in, actually, he recommended they pray before each session.
And he said we need to go down the street and pray about this.
Yeah, well, originally he just recommended they pray before each session, but then they argued about that for 4 days. And so they ultimately decided to go down the street because originally hiring a clergyman got shot down. But anyway.
I want to make one observation from what you just said, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
And then I want to hear Dennis's take on James Otis. I think it's really important to understand that moment in time. Mm-hmm. Before and beginning with the Constitutional Convention. As you said, you had quarreling states, like siblings who didn't get along.
Mm-hmm. Petulant children.
And they're quarreling because they see themselves as equals.
Well, and as important pieces of this republic.
Yeah,
their voice was important too, and in some cases it was because of size of population, and in some cases it was wealth, and there was different reasons. But yeah, they quarreled like siblings.
This is even before the republic,
right?
They're it shows you how unique and
as colonies they quarreled. Why do you think they had militias in the beginning?
Yeah,
it wasn't because of the British as much as it was each other.
But they saw themselves as an individual, separate political entity.
Right.
And people from these separate political entities came together to create something that they knew they needed. And they argued about it for 4 months plus. Mm-hmm. So you have these arguing siblings sitting in a room, hot as hell, in Philly. Do you really believe, given all that in consideration, their goal was a pure democracy?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
And go away, you strong state individual attitude? No, absolutely not. Last thing, James Otis was definitely not happy about the writ of assistance. which was a general search warrant. And whoever held that search warrant, it didn't have a place. It didn't have a thing. It didn't even have a name. You could go search anywhere, anytime, because this was Britain's way of going after smuggling.
Right.
Dennis, what else do you want to talk about with James Otis? Dennis, are you still there?
Yeah.
All
Well, I just wanted to, bring up the fact that, he was kind of like the founding grandfather,
Yeah.
And, the writs of assistance and all the things that, England was doing, leading up to, the revolution, for 20 or 30 or more years. And he did the right thing, and tough life. He gets hit by lightning, but he is a connecting point between, the England's peaceful rebellion versus, our revolution. So he helped bridge that gap. And he inspired
he
a lot
he understood natural rights, and he was the one who went from defending the writs to fighting against them. And he got up there and he says, "Hey, man, your home is your castle. You have rights not to be searched and seized in this manner. You have rights to having a jury during your deliberations, during your trials. You have these rights." He was fighting for natural rights. And, you've heard me say this over and over in the show and before. The whole system is all about human nature and our natural rights. That's what it all comes down to. And he understood that.
What's interesting about him is that he'd gotten into a bar fight with a British person, and he got severely injured, and he had a really tough life after that. And he apparently
had a head injury.
Yeah, he'd gone out to the country.
From the bar fight, got a head injury.
Correct. And he was at some friend's house out in the country. It was at night. For whatever reason, it was a stormy night. He went outside, and he, as Dennis said, he got hit by lightning. And I'm thinking about, given all the considerations that happened for him to be in that position at that exact moment in time, to be hit by lightning, he was being called home. So, thank you, James Otis.
All right, very good. And get back to, our discussion earlier too, and you've got these founding fathers, and James Otis being an influence, and Patrick Henry being an influence, and the list goes on and on and on. And they understand that their aim is to secure the natural rights of the people, as I was telling you earlier. And so they're in this convention in 1787 during the heat of summer. The way I like to say it is they were indoors, the windows and doors shut, in wool clothing, with wigs on their head, during the heat of summer in Philadelphia. If you've ever been to Philadelphia during the summer and the humidity and all that.
And no air conditioning.
And no deodorant. So and they pulled it up. They put it all together. They created this patchwork. Because understand, I never want you to think that, they came up with this great idea. They did, in the sense of pulling all these things together, and there are original components in that Constitution that are nowhere else in history. But the patchwork of the Constitution really was drawing from ideas throughout history, and the contrast to other systems is glaring, not only to the monarchies in Europe and the theocracies in the Middle East, but also, all you got to do is examine the differences between the principles of the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The French Revolution, expressed in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, The principles of the American Revolution as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Then you can compare the sovereignty of the states in the Union we call America to the position of subjectivity possessed by regions and provinces and other historical and modern countries. Individualism versus collectivism. Secularism in the French Revolution and a Christian foundation in the American Revolution. And there's even some present day nations that claim to have states like America. Mexico's one of them. But they fall short of the idea because those states are not individual members of the Union with jurisdictional rights, like here in America. They're more like territories of a nation whose rights are determined and defined by an overpowering national government. The importance of the rights of the states, in fact, is so important to them that they dedicated an amendment in the Bill of Rights to them, the 10th Amendment. So you have really some key features here when it comes to American liberty. Individual natural rights. That's individualism and natural rights, and the rights of the sovereign states. And so when you look back in history, liberty is not the rule. Liberty is the exception. Most of your systems throughout history are despotic, tyrannical. The framers determined that life, liberty, and property, that these concepts, they were finished with those concepts being determined and defined by merciless rulers. The Declaration of Independence, in the Declaration of Independence, they called for a government that derived its just powers from the consent of the governed. History has shown, though, pursue a path through democracy is destructive. We said that. The people needed to be involved, though, in making the laws. They still needed to have their consent. They still need to be involved. But at the same time, the rule of law must be at the center of the process, and there must be mechanisms in place to provide a check against the excesses of democracy. How do you give the people a voice without giving them a voice? That's basically what they're trying to do. And they also needed kind of an aristocracy to be in place. That's the reason why the states, as I mentioned earlier, had their voice in the Senate. It's a pseudo-aristocracy. You want aristocracy in the sense that you want people who understand the system, part of the system, but there has to be checks and balances because those who are skilled in the science of politics, if they gain too much power, they devolve the system into a tyranny. So you need the advantages of an aristocracy without the disadvantages of an aristocracy. You need an aristocracy without it being one. A virtuous culture needed to be in place. We need the people to be firmly religious, firmly moral. But you don't want a theocracy. Once again, we're looking for balance. Because if a theocracy is in place, I don't know about you, but I would not be excited if my church leaders were the ones running government. But that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to be a deeply religious people and that our faith shouldn't influence us when it comes to our system. You don't want a government controlled by the church, but you don't want the church controlled by the government. And so you needed, once again, to find that balance. You needed a leader, a president, a figurehead, strong like a king for certain things, but also limited in power so that they could never proclaim themselves a king. Rather than legislating with the power of an oligarchy or nobility, we want them executing law that's legislated by a different body. Strong on the external, dealing with other countries, but limited domestically. And the whole thing proved to be the ultimate balancing act. I mean, think about what I'm saying here. Basically, what they're saying is, and I know the old saying is kind of erroneous the way it's presented, but you'll know what I mean. They want to have their cake and eat it too. It's like what I say about golf. You can hit it hard or you can hit it straight, but you can't But you can't have both typically. Joe Scarafone, there was not 7 amendments, it was 7 articles. 7 articles of the original Constitution. Amendments came later. Welcome, Joe. Good to see you in the chat, asking questions. So we have this ultimate balancing act. We want a leader that's powerful without power. We want a legislature that legislates, but it's limited in its lawmaking. We want a judiciary that judges, but only by applying the laws to the cases they hear, nothing more. We want a system that ensures the large population centers don't dominate the system through democracy, but we want the voice of the people to be involved. What a crazy request. The Greeks suffered numerous calamities at the hands of democracy. The Romans created a republic that ultimately descended into a tyranny under a succession of Caesars that stripped the people of religious freedom, among other things. The federal systems of the Middle Ages obliterated the distinction of private individual rights, establishing that possessions of property were an exercise of noble sovereignty. The Balancing Act by the Founding Fathers required that the people must no longer be subjects, but citizens, as Dennis brought up earlier in the program, something that really hadn't been in play in the manner that the Americans were creating since Greece and Rome. Citizens with a wide degree of individual liberty, and that those liberties were secured against infringement, not only from other individuals, but also from the government. Historically, when the degree of individual liberties was at its greatest point, progress and safety were also at their greatest point. The more power was distributed, the greater the and when I say more power distributed, in other words, outward into different directions, the greater the liberty. The more power was centralized, the less liberty was possessed by the people. Paternalism and governmental infringement on natural rights led to tyranny. Initiative and self-reliance of the individual always strengthened the system and led to prosperity and progress. Christianity, in particular, seemed to historically go hand in hand with liberty and prosperity. Christianity appealed to individuals because of at its very foundation was the personal decision of the individual. It's about individualism. Christianity possesses no necessary relation to the state. The God of Christianity has no connection to nations or regions. Christianity spread throughout the world, spread into all regions of the planet, finding appeal and adherence among all peoples. Christianity provides that God is sovereign and existed long before governments by men, and therefore natural rights must come from the Creator, same as was believed by the Saxons, though they were pagans until their culture met Christianity in Britain. Christianity supported the individual conscience of men, implying that the individual is more important than the collective, and it was then the duty of the individual to be a positive influence upon their community as an individual, not a mindless pawn of the collective. Individuality, therefore, naturally demanded the security of each individual's rights, life, liberty, and property. So, in other words, religion, Christianity, is good. But it having an unholy marriage with government and being a part of the oligarchy, the controlling mechanism, is bad. You don't, for fear of theocracy, completely throw religion out the window. Tyranny cannot survive when the individual believes in natural God-given rights and is willing to rebel against a government that does not honor and secure those rights. This was the realization by the Founding Fathers. And once they pulled it all together in the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, the concept exploded. Its influence had been felt in Roman law and the foundational beliefs of the Saxons, Natural law's growth was inevitable during the Age of Enlightenment because it was the logical conclusion of reason and conscience. The concept of natural rights transformed the structure of society by emphasizing the importance of individual liberty. So while the Magna Carta, the British Declaration of Rights, and the writings of figures like John Locke and Montesquieu became gospel of the American masses, it was the Declaration of Independence and it was the U.S. Constitution that finally pulled it all together. The only concern, once it was established, was this: would future generations adhere to the original intent of the social contract created by the framers of the Constitution and the ratification by the states? Or would they allow the concepts of natural law to fall into disregard in the name of the good of the state and under the pressures of those seeking to place the collective above the individual? And that's what we're seeing today. How is one to safeguard those revolutionary ideas if we don't even understand them? Getting back to these fundamentals. How can you practice the fundamentals if you don't even understand them? Words on the pages of our founding documents only tell us part of the story. Each line of text, each word, every part of those documents tell a story. But to understand the story, one must dig into the context and histories behind them. And that is where what we're talking about here, why it's so important, why the examination of those words and phrases and ideas are so important. It's so important that we understand them, that we're informed by them, that we recognize how to defend them and ensure that those freedoms we inherited remain in place. To understand the Constitution, we must understand the American story. And like those who forged this union of states into existence, we must be willing to defend its principles and ideas. No excuses. Well, I got 2 jobs. I got to do this. I get it. Do something. We have a responsibility to our union, just like you have a responsibility to your family. Oh, well, I didn't get around to making dinner for my family. And, Billy is still sitting at the park waiting to be picked up. I just didn't have time. No, you're going to find a way because it's your responsibility. And people get harmed if you don't take care of your responsibilities. Our system is no different. In the end, without the foundational principles and original intent of the United States Constitution, America is nothing more than another nation like the rest of them, wallowing in the fears and tears of despotism on the world stage. And I want to make sure I always greet anybody who appears in the chat room. After Joe Scarafoni showed up, Pug's mom, she puts, I would hope that, like the squeaky wheel, we keep petitioning them to get an answer to our grievances. Pug's mom, it sounds like you've been listening to me lately about the petitioning the government for redress of grievances. Then Joe says, I miss Marla's. Now, I gotta bring the audience up to speed. Marla's is a restaurant in Beaumont, Banning. I think it was in Banning, where I used to teach my Constitution classes up there. And the owner, it's awesome. During COVID, I was teaching a class there. He had a sign at the door: if you come in here, you are participating in a protest, no masks allowed, kind of thing. They had the best stuffed bell peppers. I would always order that. Joe, I think I have mastered how to do it. The last half dozen times I made stuffed bell peppers, they're so good. But anyway, so and Joe says the radio station before was harder to find. He likes this Rumble thing. He likes us being on Rumble. Joe, do me a favor. Tell everybody else about it. Send out the link. Let people know.
Give my hello to Joe.
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. Say your hello to Joe.
Yeah, hi, Joe. Dennis Jackson here. I remember the first time I met you, I was confused over what your last name was. Finally got it down, but It's good to hear that you're with us today. It's been years since we've seen each other, but nice to know you're here.
Well, Dennis, since you spoke up, I just finished talking about American principles and the founders. And I know it's kind of a continuing theme from what I was saying earlier, but do you have any particular
Well, I got a
thoughts
quick
about
question
why?
I wanted to
Go ahead.
I had a
All
quick question I wanted to give you before you get out the subject matter. We've been
And Joe
talking
says,
about
and Joe says, "Hey, Dennis," by the way, in the chat. All right, go ahead.
It's 250 years now of American, whatever you want to call it, exceptionalism, self-governance, all of the things that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What percent of the planet right now, depending upon how you want to define totalitarianism, if you want to push Sharia underneath that, communism under that, theocracies under that are kind of totalitarian, authoritarian, what percent of the people on the planet right now in our enlightened time do you think right now are living really without rights?
All of them. Even we are, for the most part. We have a handful of them more than the rest of the world, but even we are under assault. Now, if you want to talk about pure socialism and communism, I'd say probably a majority. At least we are able to have access to some, and we have some hope, especially with the current administration. But I mean, we've got, in the deep state and the bureaucracy and throughout, the halls of government, we have a problem. We have over 100 Muslims holding different offices throughout the country. So, to be honest with you, and I hate to say it this way, but all of them, even us. However, here it's not so bad. I can still say that.
Well, I agree. It's the majority. I mean, China by itself, Russia to a greater or lesser degree, depending upon what rights you want to talk about. A lot of these elected people. I have a hard time trying to figure out even how I want to classify France.
They're socialists.
Yeah.
All of Europe is basically socialist, some of them more so than others. And understand me, audience, when I say socialist or socialism, I mean communist. And I mean, the word communist from Karl Marx's point of view has never been achieved, and it never will be. But socialism and communism are just two words for really the same thing. Just socialism is the journey from Karl Marx's point of view to communism. It is the big government that must impose. So what we believe, for some reason, we have decided socialism is like communism light. No, socialism is communism from the way we look at communism, an overpowering government that controls and owns the means of production and disallows ownership, goes after those who succeed. So isn't France under Napoleonic law? Partly. They're also partly under a lot of socialism. Then again, Joe, Germany still has a lot of Hitleric laws. For example, a law that was opposed in Germany under Adolf Hitler's regime was outlawing homeschooling, and homeschooling is still outlawed in Germany, for example. So there are remnants of different legal systems and laws from history throughout these countries. All right. Anything else you want to add there, Dennis, before I go to Alan?
No, go ahead.
All right, Alan. I once again kind of expanded on what's already been kind of the foundational topics, American principles. I've gotten into a little bit deeper into what ours is. So go ahead, Alan. Give us your take on what I just said.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I like what you said. It's interesting to put the concepts that we've been talking about and really connecting them to the 10th Amendment. And that in a way, this is the states putting something in there for themselves, not just the individual people. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That is the states really saying, we have something. And that gives, to me, it's just a more solidifying way of understanding that states individually had a very strong political attitude about themselves, their sovereignty, and that it's, they weren't just another bow down entity to this new thing they called the federal government. Their state sovereignty was very important. And there's nothing like that, I think, that ever existed before. The states are the ones that helped create or did create the Constitution. They're the ones that fought together to defeat the British. And they wanted to have a say-so with what's going forward. Theocracy, you mentioned it, but just to be clear, is a very different kind of government. This is where a god or a deity is recognized as the supreme leader. Not people, nothing. And that means however people are connecting to this deity, that book is what rules. I was also thinking, as you're talking about, because you talked about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and I decided to type out the dates. So the date that we recognize for the Declaration of Independence is July 4, 1776. The date on the Constitution is September 17th, 1787. This thing was done in 11 years. That is, in some ways, to me, an amazingly short amount of time to go that journey.
Well, yeah, they learned their lessons, and then they made the adjustment, they made the correction, and then it has lasted over 2 centuries.
Yeah. The other thing about it is that, I don't think people give the signers of the Declaration of Independence due credit. Now, there are 56 signatures on that document. And I believe every guy now most of it didn't get signed until I think August of 1776. But every guy who put his name on that document, knowing this would eventually get to the British, the King, Parliament, they knew they're not only making one heroic statement telling Britain, go bite me, you're out of here. They essentially assigned their death warrant. They were acknowledging their treason.
Committing high treason as the character in what's that movie with Nicolas Cage, National Treasure. So they committed high treason. That's exactly right.
And you mentioned about getting people to do things, and we're real busy and tired and everything else. These people found time to do what they did. Think about the travel limitations that they had to experience just to get to Philadelphia, live there.
Right.
And the actual physical survival was an everyday event. And they still did this. So they don't get enough due credit for what they did. For most people don't even think about them, and most people, getting back to fundamentals that we need to educate on. Fundamentals, 56 names on that document. The other is that, so I'm going to ask you from a constitutional point of view, because we have different groups in this country, I believe including the Supreme Court, who feels they have the authority to broadly interpret the Constitution. Now, my question is to you, is it proper to say that what was written then and what it meant then is what it means today, or do we get to rightfully just interpret words and phrases as we choose to today? What do you think?
I had a discussion about this one not too long ago. Liberty and tyranny don't change. And the Constitution was written in a manner that the average person understood it. Then is been made complicated, complex, because of this idea of interpreting, because of lawyers and judges and political figures and all of that, and lobbyists and and the list goes on and on and on. And so it has become complex. But to broadly interpret or to say that it's living and breathing, therefore what it means is different today because we have evolved somehow. No, what we're doing is we're heading in the very direction that they meant to avoid with the Constitution.
For me,
so go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's that, and we've talked about this on other times, about somebody's great recipe. You read it, you understand it, you follow it. You don't broadly interpret it. Because if you do, you're changing the recipe.
Right.
This isn't a written agreement, a contract.
Yeah, and I've used the recipe example, of course, many times. If your recipe takes cilantro, for example, and you decide, parsley is close enough, you put parsley in there, it's going to mess it all up. And then everybody says, oh, when things aren't working right, it's the Constitution's fault. No, it's because we're not applying the recipe as it was originally intended.
Right. And the people who were placed in a position of power have not spoken out against this practice, which means the vast majority of people just feel it's okay because they did not learn the fundamentals that you don't change what the Constitution means by just saying that it means this. You have to amend it. And the founders were wise enough to know they could not write a document that would never change. They just didn't want the changes to be willy-nilly. That's why the amendment process is difficult, challenging, but it can be fixed. It can be added to. This, to me, was a very wise decision and really showed some great forethought. Last thing you mentioned, I didn't know this, I am going to remember now, that Hitler outlawed homeschooling. Gee, I wonder why. Didn't he have some kind of saying that you can something to the effect you control the future when you control the children?
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes by him, I don't mean it in his favorite in the sense of that I liked it, but that it definitely proves the point I'm trying to put across, is he was speaking to the older generation. He said that, you will pass away, but the younger generation stands in the new camp, and it's all they will ever know. And that's part of the reason for outlawing homeschooling. You want public, and so now you look at the DSA, you look at the Democrats. What are they trying to do right now? They're trying to get rid of private schooling and homeschooling. Why? Because that's how you control the future. Is you teach the minds of the future.
And that's why he had Hitler youth camps.
Sure, absolutely. And that's why as young Christians, when we have our kids, we believe we should have our kids in church. Not taking the same concept in a good direction. Make sure they have that foundation. But yeah, it's understood. It's understood.
Well, it really shows how important homeschooling can be when Hitler was against it.
Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I didn't intend to, but Joe has kind of asked for this. And let me say something about Joe real quick. And Joe, I love you, brother, but he loves to needle and prod and sometimes try to get you with a few gotchas. And he asked a question which is kind of a what's the right word? It's a loaded question. So earlier, if you remember during the discussion, and he had mentioned was in France under Napoleonic law. I said, well, partially. But then again, and then I brought up Hitler's law still in Germany. There's a lot of remnants of old laws and old legal systems that still exist in a lot of these countries. So he asked, well, explain Napoleonic law. Well, that's a loaded question. Here's why. Because on the surface, it sounds like a wonderful thing. It is basically an extension of the collectivist argument by Rousseau and those that committed the French Revolution. But Napoleonic law, at its basis, sounded wonderful on paper. And basically what it said that, everybody need to be unified, a collective, secular, no religion, because, that state church interfered when we had an established church. It needs to be written, and it's everybody's equality. Under the, equality, sounds like today's lefties and collectivists, right? And then standardized legal procedures, which is a good thing. The Saxons had standardized legal procedures, so this was nothing new. And so this law, the system of laws, essentially replaced what had existed before Rousseau, before the French Revolution, before Napoleon, which was basically Romanized Europe. And so they had standardized, and Napoleonic law has standardized rules for contracts, property, family, and all that jazz. Secular egalitarian principles. Because it was a collectivist, we're all equal kind of thing. Which is on its face has advantages. It got rid of nobility, and I agree with getting rid of nobility. We're all born, right? We're all created equal in the eyes of God. We all get all of the natural rights, so forth. But this was a collectivistic way of doing it. This was a collectivistic way of ensuring equal treatment under the law. And it actually became very influential worldwide. Now, that said, what it did is Napoleon was able then to, once he got it all going, was able to use it as a political weapon to consolidate power. Hey, we're just trying to keep you safe. We're trying to make sure this is in place. And while it did stabilize the system for a while, after years of chaos from the French Revolution, Hitler stabilized the system for a little while after the Weimar Republic. Socialism always works in the beginning till you run out of money, other people's money. Then the chaos returned, the dictatorship became stronger, and it allowed him, he took advantage of the system, the collectivistic system, to rule as an authoritarian figure. The first consul, which, by the way, is a word taken from the Roman Senate. And then he became emperor, which is basically what the Caesars were. So it was his own version of what became the Roman Empire. The Napoleonic law essentially allowed him to strengthen central control, replace a lot of the uncertainty that was there because of the revolution. Because, see, when the French Revolution happened, it was, we got to change this, but they really didn't have a set plan per se, and there was a lot of chaos, and there was a lot of killing, there was a lot of murder and different positions trying to grab what power they could, and he kind of unified it. So it got rid of the chaos, but it got rid of the chaos under unitarian rule. And so, and then once he had control, then all the parts of Napoleonic law and the legal system and all that, he could then manipulate and to reinforce his own political dominance. So I hope that answers the question, Joe. And Joe says, no, I'm not trying to gotcha. I just wanted other people to know. All right, I appreciate that. So are you saying you had faith I knew? And if that's the case, then I appreciate it, I think. Come on, Joe. I absolutely appreciate you. There are a handful of things that Joe and I will go head to head on. But anyway, so now let's go away from Napoleonic law, which is Napoleonic law is important. It's important to understand it because we need to understand history. I have a basic idea of Napoleonic law because in order to understand political theory, political systems, you need to know all of them, not just the Constitution, not just the Founding Fathers. I've studied Rousseau. I've studied Aristotle. I've studied, Socrates, Plato, Polybius, Solon, Cicero, Cato, Montesquieu, John Locke, Edmund Burke. I've studied all of this the best. Now, I will not sit here and be able to tell you right out of my head everything about what I've studied. Some of those metal filing cabinet drawers in my brain are rusty. It takes a little prodding. It's like last night, man. I'm trying to remember something, and Warhamster in the show caught me in error. I knew that there were 4 state constitutions before the Declaration of Independence: New Hampshire, South Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, in that order. But for some reason, I could only remember one of them last night. So when I said state constitutions, I said beginning with, the only one that came to mind was Virginia. So I said Virginia, and I forgot the other 3. Well, Warhamster, being in New Hampshire, he jumped all over it. Sometimes I got to correct Mr. Constitution. Well, it's just I didn't remember the other 3. I knew New Hampshire was first, but at that moment it wasn't in my mind. That particular cabinet drawer or filing cabinet drawer was not opening all the way, and I was opening it up just enough so I could see the label on one of the folders, Virginia. But Joe says it's called old age or sometimers. Yeah, okay. I appreciate that. I'm old. I'm older. So, and I'm the youngest guy on the show. That's all I got to say. All right. Now, get back to our topic because we got about 20 minutes left. And so I wanted to talk about, because I want to get back to our Constitution, fundamentals. Today is all about fundamentals, getting down to the fundamentals. How is it the founding fathers, how is it that they understood they needed a Constitution? How is it they understood that the best way to do it was to write it down? Humanity's history is filled with attempts to structure political power. And with the founding fathers, there was particular influence on securing individual liberties and individualism and in our case, states' rights. But the individual liberties, this is something that the founding fathers didn't go, hey, that's a good idea. This is something that many systems in history tried to secure. And I mean, this idea of having a constitution or constitutional concepts, not necessarily a written constitution often, but the written constitutions that did develop over time. There was Joe, to answer your question, he says, how did they know how to number the amendments, order of precedence? I think you mean articles. And there was a committee of style during the convention. Gouverneur Morris led that committee, and the committee had James Madison on it and Alexander Hamilton and one other person. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. And the committee of style. So what they did is they did all the debating of what they wanted, and then the committee of style organized it and put it in the places they wanted and decided we ought to do this and all of that. Of course, Robert's rules is based on order of precedence, and order of precedence is a part of what the committee of style operated under, for sure. But anyway, get back to the point. So constitutional concepts, written constitutions, which was a revolutionary approach that transformed the journey when it began to happen. This is something that the founding fathers studied, they understood, These guys are pretty educated. Even George Washington, who didn't have a formal education, his half-brother, knowing that George couldn't afford to go to private schools and couldn't go, he came from a much more humble upbringing, but his half-brother, who had connections to kind of the higher classes at the time, gave George Washington all the books he needed to read to be educated just as well as those who had a formal education. So they understood that throughout history, there was a number of ancient civilizations that had established a comprehensive set of laws that applied to members of society. I mean, you had ancient Israel's confederation of tribes as described in the Bible. They operated under a covenant. And that covenant is sort of like a constitutional concept that established fundamental laws and the principles of governance. The 12 Tables of Rome, they represent a crucial milestone in the history of constitutional development, serving as among the earliest and most influential examples of a fundamental legal code being committed to writing and publicly displayed. The 12 Tables were created about 450 years before Christ, was a culmination of a long struggle, because you got to remember, Rome began as a kingdom with 10 kings. Then they transformed into a republic, and then from a republic into an empire under the succession of Caesars, right, which that happened about 50 years before Christ was born. So the common people, as Rome was slowly becoming a republic, were complaining. So wait a second. We're creating this system. We're no longer a kingdom. We're becoming a republic, but it feels like a kingdom. Those who are in power can interpret the law any way they want because it's unwritten. And if we don't know what the unwritten law is, or we do know it, they can change it. And they can change it to fit their interests. We want the law to be written so that it can't be changed, so that it's clear and equally applied to all citizens, and it needs to be put out there for everybody to see. So a commission was established to codify Roman law. And the commission even traveled to Athens, Greece, to study the laws of Solon, which I mentioned earlier, and other Greek legal systems before drafting the tables. And the first set contained 10 tables, with a second commission that added 2 more later. That's why it wound up being the 12 tables. The 12 tables covered all aspects of Roman life and law. And then, once the 12 tables were codified, written, put into print, basically, hammered into stone, set in stone, they were put on public display in the Roman Forum, in the center of Rome, so that all citizens would have access to them, could look at them, could read them. This established the principle that law should be public and known to those it governs, and it should be written down. The tables attempted to balance rights and interests. Balancing act, like I talked about earlier. By committing the law to writing, the tables established that the same legal principles applied to both the people and the aristocracy was the same. Nobody was above the law. The law was written, and no one could say, I didn't know, or no one could say, well, it actually means this. Well, where's that written? We decided that just now. They couldn't do that anymore. The influence of Roman law during the Republic influenced legal systems throughout Europe, particularly this idea of written and publicly accessible law. Under Romanized Europe, political power remained concentrated, however, in the hands of the aristocracy. Now, way to the north, the barbarians, as they would call them, they weren't as barbaric as it was made out to be. A barbarian part of being barbarians was overstated. The Saxons, northern Germanic people, had a legal tradition that also served as a crucial pillar in the development of the American Constitution. Mosaic law did, Roman aristocratic law, Mosaic theocratic law, and Saxon law all were influential on what became the American system. But the Saxon law was distinct from the Roman and Mosaic systems. It emphasized, even more so than the others, individual natural rights, and that those individual natural rights are divinely ordained. This provides a profound influence on American constitutional thought. Saxon society was organized around kinship groups and tribal loyalties, with a legal system that emphasized personal freedom and individual responsibility. Their law was not imposed by a centralized state, but through localism. This would later become known as the common law. Their structure of governance created a system of distributed authority rather than centralized power, with local communities playing a significant role in governance and justice. The people were involved. They had a voice. They petitioned the government when they didn't like what they were seeing, and government listened. When Christianity arrived in Anglo-Saxon England, you got Saxon law at this point, the dominant law in Britain, in England. Then Christianity arrives. Christianity did not replace Saxon legal traditions, but rather transformed them by providing a more theological foundation. Alfred the Great, from 871 to 899, combined a Saxon customary law with biblical principles, creating a legal tradition that emphasized both natural rights and moral responsibilities. Then the Norman conquest of 1066, well, that's where the Roman legal concepts now gets into England. So we have the Saxons, we have the Christians melding. Here comes the Roman concepts through the Normans. But rather than replacing the Saxon tradition that already had inherited elements of Christian tradition and morality, elements of the Roman system were also gradually absorbed into existing common law. The synthesis created a rich legal tradition that combined Saxon concepts with Christian principles and Roman contributions. So the Saxons brought individual natural rights and local self-governance, customary law. The Christians brought moral law, equality before God, and justice tempered with mercy. And the Romans brought systematic legal categories, written records, procedural regularity. The combination of Saxon tradition with Hebraic and Christian beliefs and Roman influences launched what would ultimately become Western legal tradition and would become, in particular, the foundation of the British system of law that so heavily influenced the framers of the United States Constitution. So as I was saying earlier, it was a journey. The founders didn't just sit there and go, hey, I got an idea. All of this was a part of their journey of learning. They knew this stuff. They were learning this stuff. They knew that the British system, after that, took great leaps forward. They had studied the concept of fundamental law, limiting rulers, the Magna Carta, this idea that the king was also subject to the law. Magna Carta defined governmental powers, concept of natural rights in a written document. Now, while the Magna Carta was not a complete constitution, it planted the seed of that government may only operate according to established written principles. The Dutch Republic, who was also influenced by the Saxons and the Romans and Christianity, they also did, while not written in a modern sense, had a written constitution, but it relied on like foundational treaties. In the New World, a desire for religious freedom and a geographical separation from the rule of monarchy, because now, hey, the long arm of monarchy isn't reaching across the Atlantic the same way it could reach around the countries of Europe. So they got this geographical separation. They got this desire for religious freedom, this desire for their natural rights to be left alone. This created a whole new direction that extended Saxon and Christian traditions in a manner that would ultimately revolutionize the concepts of self-governance, consent of the governed, and natural rights. And then in 1620, a group of separatists who had gone a little too far north, they landed at a place called Plymouth, which was not within the Massachusetts Bay Colony, so they were outside the charter. Technically, they were not given the authority to land up there based on their charter, so they had to write a new one and then offer it to England and hope it got accepted later. So they wrote a new one, the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was the first written framework of government in North America and an early form of a written constitution in what is now the United States. And it set a vital precedent for self-government and the social contract. 1639, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut set up a unified government for colonial towns in the Connecticut region. And it's considered to be the first true written constitution in America. The English Civil Wars and the Glorious Revolution in 1688 produced the English Declaration of Rights in 1689. Remember, these guys are Englishmen. They're like, oh, a Declaration of Rights, a English Bill of Rights. That further developed constitutional principles by focusing on the security of individual natural rights. So by the time they got to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, maybe I should put them in the opposite order here, these concepts have been developing. These men in Philadelphia for the Declaration of Independence and later for the Articles of Confederation of the Constitution, they understood this history. They still debated. Trust me, there was still a battle on the floor. But they put these ideas into writing in the Declaration of Independence. That humanity is endowed by their creator with certain individual rights. They put a union into place in the Articles of Confederation. And then when the weaknesses became apparent, they solidified it through the Constitutional Convention. But these are ideas that they didn't just come up with during the convention. These were ideas throughout history. And when you read Madison's notes, and he says, well, the Athenians did this, and this group did that, and that group did this. And Montesquieu says all of this is brought into the conversation during the Constitutional Convention. The journey, the story of America is a long one that began long before we could call this place that we live now America. All right, that's my final salvo. With a few minutes left, just a couple minutes left, I'm going to ask you gentlemen to give me a 1 or 2 minute thought process on it. Let's go with you first this time, Alan. Based on the history of constitutions, how the American story has always been there, just kind of got patchworked together during the convention. These are concepts they understood, they knew, and developed over time. What's your thoughts?
It is amazing that in the time frame that was occurring, what they had lived through, they could bring such a document into existence. It's just amazing. And they didn't want a democracy. They didn't want a theocracy. They didn't want a monarchy. The states wanted a republic. And that's what they wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And last thing, because I know we're about to run out of time, New Hampshire was the first state to have a state convention, January 5, 1776. South Carolina, March 26, 1776. Virginia, June 29, 1776. And yes, New Jersey, July 2nd, 1776.
So I had the order correct in my head.
There you go.
Once I finally got the drawer open.
Yeah, which is a hard door to open. But
yeah.
It's amazing.
The older you get, the stiffer that drawer is.
What's amazing is that this tells us that 4 colonies had become states, separate, independent.
Before the Declaration.
Before the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
There you go. So yeah, New Hampshire's first.
As Warhamster would proudly explain.
New Hampshire. Yep.
New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dennis, final thoughts about what I had to say about the history of constitutions and the story of America and how it began long before America. Oh, hang on.
I mean,
there we go.
I know that we have a very quick acceleration. I mean, Alan brought this up between 1776 and 1787. To go from the Articles to the Declaration to the Constitution, and then the Bill of Rights, and then some other things thereafter. There truly was a huge sense of sovereignty. I mean, if you were a Massachusetts man, or if you were a Kentuckian, or whatever you were, they really owned their state sovereignty. And of course, during the Civil War, you had the Virginia 2nd versus the Pennsylvania 11th, or whatever they were.
Yeah. States held on to their identities even up to that time, for sure.
Yeah. So, then of course, everything has kind of gotten, disjointed and watered down. And, I find it really disgusting that the people that learn civics and then want to teach civics, when they're in power, they ruin civics, because they want to teach what they want to see, and they're a political animal, which is one reason why they chose that category to study. But then they supplant, teaching, like Alan would say, you need to serve and protect and defend, and you need to be actively involved in protecting it, the Constitution. But the guardians of the truth that should go to the youth, they went AWOL. And you can see that in manufacturing, you can see it in education, you can see it in a lot of different areas. And this goes back to the first thing that we talked about, on the show today, was how difficult it is for we the people to be effective in making sure that the government does what it's supposed to do by protecting my rights instead of trying to, take them from me. So
well, and through the educational system and media and entertainment and all of that, they've been indoctrinated to believe what they do and think the way they do, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing this incredible rise of socialism. The DSA, they add the word democratic because they've convinced all of us that democratic's a good thing, and so they put democratic in front of socialism. See, it's not so bad. It's got the word democracy in front of it. But there's still a bunch of communists either way. And the kids who don't know history, and history has not been taught, and statues have been toppled on purpose so that nobody wants to know history, don't know the history of over 100 million people dying because of communism during the 20th century, for example. So there you go. Is that the end of your thoughts?
yeah, that's fine.
All right, very good. All right, everybody. Here's the nice thing about not being on KMET 1490 AM anymore. I mean, I miss it. I enjoyed being on radio. For those of you who don't know this, I was a radio guy for about 15 years. 1 month short of 15 years. 15 years AM FM radio. Now it is all here. Rumble and YouTube. and DouglasVGibbs.com. DouglasVGibbs.com. Be sure to go there and check it out. I do have a new book out. I've got another one on its way. And so definitely check out the books page at DouglasVGibbs.com. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, friends. God bless you. Thank you, Alan and Dennis, for joining me today on this program. Dennis, did you have anybody you want to plug?
I got a mental block now. It's Equipping the Persecuted is the group, and they're all about trying to stop the massacre of Christians in Nigeria. It's amazing that we're talking about that at the very end here now as a sponsor, as we've been talking about America and all those great principles, but yet we've got religious just extermination, genocide going on throughout the world in various pockets. It's just really a shame.
All right, very good. And Alan, plug yourself.
FedEd, FEDED.us for basic monetary system education. Tomorrow, Sunday, 5 to 7 p.m. on Patriot Soapbox for the Republic.
And I am Douglas V. Gibbs, DouglasVGibbs.com. We'll see you next time. I will be on For the Republic tomorrow. Then I will be back Thursday with Mr. Constitution Hour right here. Patriot Soapbox on Fridays with my wife from 2 to 4. And then, of course, Constitution Radio again on Saturday. And that is currently our schedule. We're getting ready to integrate some more stuff. We're still getting some bugs out of the system. Thank you, Joe, for letting me know that in my email, for some reason, a link to the radio station is still somewhere in my email. I appreciate that. Thank you. We'll get that fixed. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. God bless and stay constitutional.